Poolsville.
Poolsville High School. We are in the same place, Poolsville High School, with that TBD, looking at the new approach, and we will see where that falls in the near future. Everything else is sort of quiet in the Poolsville cluster.
You think so?
It is. Dr. Daka?
No.
Okay. Ms. O'Neill?
Well, I just have to comment. We've received probably 200 or more emails about, that the superintendent has removed Poolsville from a date determined to a TBD, and we've not yet heard from Wooten. I suspect we will in our hearings, and as well as Damascus, because the order was Wooten, Poolsville, Damascus based upon the fact list. And I know that the policy committee will have its work cut out for them with the policy FAA and then FKB, sustaining and modernizing schools. The issue is, how are we going to, sustain these buildings over time if they're not, getting a full-blown modernization like what's happened at Wheaton or what will be happening at Seneca Valley? I mean, over time, we're going to have to seriously address issues. And in some of the emails, they've referenced ADA compliance issues that exist now. And I know that in one of the previous years in the hearing, we heard about fire and life safety issues, which then turned out to not be so. But, the Poolsville cafeteria is, pretty undersized in comparison with the program that exists at Poolsville. I assume that through the process of revising these policies, there will be some established, how we will look at work that has to be done, because, we have to, just as in your own home, if you live there over time, you have to replace the roof and the furnace in addition to doing the cosmetic things. The bathroom renovations, we put that in because so many of the schools over a long period of time, the bathrooms were a huge issue. So what, do you have any idea of, I hear the Poolsville frustration, and I know that we have that same frustration that's brewing at Wooten, Damascus, and others, and just the reality of what has to be done.
So I think a big part of the new approach that we're hoping to bring forward, and as you said, bring forward to the board, really is to get away from sort of the all or nothing approach that we've been in terms of trying to go through the buildings again in a sequential order. As you say, we know we really need to attend to these facilities that have facility needs, and we absolutely want to be coming back to the facilities, to Wooten and Poolsville and Damascus specifically, after we are able to go through and assess all of the facilities and look at what's impactful for that facility, what are the critical needs of that facility that will help sustain it over time. Part of our issue with sustaining buildings over time is that we know they're going to need to last longer however we go forward. Again, we've talked about major high school projects in the CIP already for capacity, and we know we need to be able to sustain all of our high schools and all of our facilities for that longer period of time to really allow our CIP to work through the priority needs that it has. So we would envision being able to come back to Poolsville and being able to come back to these other schools and again do a tailored analysis or a tailored evaluation and assessment of that facility and what are the critical needs there that we do need to attend to.
Right, and if I may add to Ms. McGuire's statement, I think in the CIP, under the major capital project bucket, there's about $125 million that has been allocated. So when the assessment utilizing the KFI model is done, that we're in a position to utilize those funds to start. Secondly, I think that brings out the importance of focusing on the various programs within the countywide program. There are about 12 different programs, from ADA compliance item to the fire code analysis to the PIMPI projects, PLAR projects, the roofs and HVAC projects. All those countywide program is going to help sustain our existing building and keep it in operation. So I think between the dollars that are programmed already under the major capital projects, as well as increase in the countywide program, is our strategy going into addressing those needs.
I just want to point out that when Walter Johnson was modernized, it wasn't done in the 2-year phase that we've been working on now. It was done over a period of 10 years. My niece and nephew happened to both straddle all that 10-year period of time. And, there were parts of the building that were done, a new cafeteria built, et cetera, addition. I mean, I think at one point we had almost 40 portables or so at Walter Johnson. So, I mean, but if you think about it as a 10-year project, I don't know whether Ms. Dixon was there.
Not before they started.
Okay, but I mean, certainly during the planning, it was done over, a 10-year period. And I mean, my point is, Poolsville is not going to be able to sustain without some work, and we're going to have to prioritize what needs to be done and develop a plan for these schools.
Right. And
I just want to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think there's a variety of different approaches to addressing the facility needs, and certainly, what we've done and how we've done at Walter Johnson is one way. But I think that even at Poolsville, if board members remember, we added the whole science wing addition prior to the master plan in context of the ultimate RevX project that was going to forthcome. So once we do the assessment of all our school utilizing the KFI model, and if the Poolsville is one of those projects that comes out at the top to address, there's multiple ways of implementation plan. It's not like you have to do it within systematically, or you can do it over multiple year period. There's going to be a variety of strategies that we have to think through to provide recommendation for the board's consideration.
And the only thing I just want to add is I think that's an excellent point that you made, and what you just said, Mr. Song. We're really interested in flexibility going forward. And so once we go through the policy process, this will enable us to have a range of options, depending on how we come out of policy, but to be flexible and respond to changing conditions.
Ms. Ortman-Faust?
I was just going to follow up because I actually did do that count now about older schools. There are like 44 schools that are older than Poolsville, and they do have, and they do have additions like Poolsville had the science building addition, or they might have had some kind of remodel, but a lot of them are older or not as adequate now either, and are similar situations. So it's just perspective when you always think like, oh, the ones that left behind. And I also remember asking about how many schools got bumped back with this old list. That was a question from a prior CIP year, because people think just my school was bumped back and we've been waiting for so long. And I think that Dr. Zuckerman actually made the point at our meeting with our legislative breakfast the other day that we say, oh, the CIP, process, we don't want to change it, worked, whatever. But all of these schools were bumped back year after year after year. And so that's it. That's the nature of the beast when you have so much need. Even for cafeteria capacity, core cafeteria capacity, just looking at all the schools that have 3-4 hour windows for lunch periods because they can't fit all their kids in the cafeteria. So that's not unusual either. I mean, this is the nature of having so much need and not enough funding to meet all of the needs. So I was just going to add that perspective.
Ms. Evans? Mr. Post?
Could you elaborate on what that last addition to Poolsville, the science wing, entailed and when we did it?
So we're looking at the data. I would like to say I think it was approximately 12 science labs. I have to get you that exact information.
I think it may have been around 2011 because I did have an opportunity to go up and visit.
It was several years ago, but we can get you the information. There's we presented to the board and
I just wanted it to illustrate that we haven't neglected Poolsville. We have done additions there, and we have responded to needs. It hasn't been like we totally had our hands off that school.
Can I just mention one thing that I forgot to say is one of the issues was that was mentioned in one of the letters was you have to cross through classrooms to go to other classes. And I'm trying to pick, that really does sound awkward. I don't know.
You
if
have to
the-
go outside. It's a standover,
Okay.
it's a standalone building.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but you have to cut through, I don't know, that just sounded, maybe it's just the way I read it, but, yeah, that you have to cut through classrooms, it just, I don't know.
Was it built as an open concept school?
Right.
Well, no, I think you're referring to another school that we done a couple of years back, but the science lab that we built, I believe it is 2010 or 11 in that time era, that we designed the master campus of what the ultimate end building is going to look like, and we have segmented a certain number of science labs as a separate building, detached from the current building. So in order to get to a science lab, you do have to go outside in order to get to a science lab. So it could be a problematic, during inclement weather conditions and so forth.
Right, and I know about that because they were saying about keeping the doors unlocked so that they could go between buildings, but there was something that, I had read about going between, maybe I'm getting confused with something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we had some other cases like Ridgeview or some other open schools that we have had. In order to get to a classroom, you have to go through a classroom to get to it, and I think we have resolved most of those things, but if there are still, we'll be more than happy to take a
Okay,
look at
and
them.
if you are looking at that, the other thing that was mentioned with the open schools, I think Banneker is one of them, is that the walls, you can really hear through the walls.
That's
It makes it
correct.
very difficult when you have two classrooms at once. I don't know when all those walls were put in, but I think there's been a lot of developments around those walls. And I hope that that's something that we're looking at and maybe as a potential, that we can.
Yeah, again, I think as we assess our buildings, utilizing that key facility indicator model of utilizing.
Because you don't have to necessarily redo the whole building.
No,
it's just
no,
that maybe you
right.
can replace these.
Those are the improvements that Ms. Carmi was talking about, and
Right.
so you don't necessarily have to tear down the entire building.
Right.
Is looking at very tactically,
soundproof
special
walls.
items like those that
Yeah.
we can improve, whether it's acoustics or circulations or other variety of different improvements that are needed.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Dixon?
No, I was just going to say, Matt asked the question about the addition, so that's what I wanted.
Okay,
Can I go?
sure.
Thank you. So I wanted to thank Mr. Post for his comments about that. And I was just going to mention that, a lot of the emails that we've gotten have indicated that we have basically removed Poolsville from the CIP. And I wanted to say how much I appreciate you spotlighting the fact that it is still in the CIP. We are looking at it, but we're just taking a better approach on how the dollars are going to be used. And in reference to what Ms. Ortman-Faust mentioned about the removal walls, as you know, we toured that company, Dirt, that does the like supplemental walls or whatever. What are they called? The movable walls and stuff like that. And I do think that as we're looking at alternative ways that we're doing things and things that we could do that don't have to involve doing the whole building over, those are the kind of things that we should keep in mind. So.
Dr. Daka?
The only thing about the new addition that I want to mention is that I talked before about working with our educators, with Dr. Navarro and Dr. Statham and their staff. That happened in the new addition in Poolsville because the staff had a lot to do with how the storage was done, how it would be built for robotics, for easy access to these kinds of things. So those are the kinds of cooperative measures we really need.
Dr. Dock, I think that's a great point. And Dr. Navarro and Dr. Statham, just as the CIP process has evolved and we've started to talk about the KFI model and the emphasis on program, have just been great throughout the process and continue to commit their staff to really help facilitate and reinforce that.
Okay, Quince Orchard?